Well, actually, at the very beginning, it was fighting the slaughter of unborn babies. But because there were so many people fighting that battle, I didn't think it was necessary for me to do it also. It was being handled. But what wasn't being handled was the LGBT agenda. Far, far harder battle to fight, just because anyone who does that is targeted for personal destruction. But absolutely necessary to fight, because the gay progressives are really the original foot soldiers of the sexual revolution, right? It's out of their movement in the 40s, the Mattachine Society and the work of Alfred Kinsey, who was an in-the-closet gay activist, and all those. That's where all this came from. It's evolved in our society, and so we really needed to have people who would stand up and defend biblical values, the natural family, and oppose the legitimization of sexual activity outside of marriage. Not that we demand that everybody, be heterosexual, because people have the right to be wrong in their choices, but that they not attempt to transform mainstream society to match their beliefs and goals. You should just stay in the subculture and live your life happily, discreetly outside the mainstream. They'll leave you alone, right? But if you're gonna mount gay pride parades and demand that everybody become pro-gay and cram it down all the kids' throats in the public schools and all that, we've got to stand up to that. That's what I did. So over the course of time, I became known. I was really sort of a third-tier, activist. By God's grace, I ended up as the communications director of the Oregon Citizens Alliance, the largest Christian grassroots political network ever in the United States. And it just fell into the job and was sort of on-the-job training with Holy Spirit guidance. And then proceeded on to improve my skill set by getting a law degree, and then a doctor of theology, and then a certificate in international human rights from Strasbourg, and increasingly sort of became, rose through the ranks of those who recognized as authorities on the issue. But nevertheless, after 20 years of doing that, writing books and hundreds of TV and radio shows all over the world, I wanted to change, right? And so my wife and I went to Springfield, Massachusetts. We founded an inner city mission. We were going to switch to traditional evangelism and good works. I don't want to have to debate homosexuality anymore. It's just so, you want to be able to apply your talents and skills to something besides one issue your entire life. And yet, that line from Al Pacino, in The Godfather, every time I try to get out, they drag me back in. And that's exactly what happened here. And because I got an invitation to go speak at a conference in Uganda, and I had helped to launch the pro-family movement there, back in 2002. I was a substitute speaker for the nation's first national conference, pro-family conference. The theme was on pornography and obscenity. But, and there's a little backstory here, just so you get this. This goes to the sexual revolution and the importance of it to the globalists. Uganda had the highest AIDS rate in Africa, and they turned it completely around through abstinence and fidelity in marriage by promoting biblical values. And they showed the entire world that you didn't have to do this sort of condom education, and which is all completely fake. It's designed to promote sexuality and promiscuity, not to limit it. And the globalists couldn't accept that. They had to take Uganda down because they couldn't allow a model of appropriate Bible-based response to succeed. And so, like the Soros people always do, and there's more than Soros out there, but he's the best known one, they go in and they buy media, and then they set up Marxist street organizations, and then the two groups work hand in hand in order to introduce things. They always use pornography at the beginning because it softens up, the men. Men drive society. Women are great administrators, but that's just the way things are in the created order. It's primarily, that's what happens. So you get men involved in pornography, and it changes sort of their moral compass. And then you can follow the next steps. So they always start with that. Then they introduce anti-discrimination policies and whatnot. So they started this in Uganda, and with pornography, and of course the pornography that they're getting outraged about, this is a very morally conservative society, is pictures of topless women in the newspapers, right? Same stuff that happened here. Remember that even today there's XXX pornography that 10-year-old boys are getting on their smartphones that adult men in the 50s never even heard of. But it all started with Playboy magazine. It was popular, and there's always been pornography, but it was popularized by Hugh Hefner, who called himself Kinsey's pamphleteer, right? Alfred Kinsey, the in-the-closet gay activist who almost single-handedly overturned the model penal code and laws all across the nation regarding sexuality. Anyway, pornography started here with topless women, and it was happening there. And they said they're having this big national conference, we're going to, on pornography and obscenity. And I just sort of fell into being the substitute speaker for that. And I went over there, I looked around, I said, I can tell you exactly what's going on here. And I said, they're trying to implement the sexual revolution here, and this is how it's going to work, step by step by step. And of course, that's what happened. I went back 6 months later, I did all the media, and then years passed. It's 2009. I'm in Springfield, starting this inner city mission. I wasn't going to do this stuff anymore. I get a call from Uganda, please come and help us. We're not stopping this steamroller, and we need to do something. And so I went over. They gave this seminar. I just was finishing my book called Redeeming the Rainbow. It's actually my doctoral thesis for my THD. I reworked it into a textbook on addressing the LGBT agenda called Redeeming the Rainbow, a Christian response to the gay agenda. And so I taught from that. It's basic, straightforward stuff. You can go online. Anybody can go online, just look up Redeeming the Rainbow, or send me an email, at votelively@gmail.com, and I'll send you a copy of it by email attachment, PDF. Anyway, I left after that seminar. I spoke to the members of the parliament in their assembly hall. Not a huge number of them, but a significant number. And I found out that they were going to produce some kind of a law. And so I went and gave my testimony about having been an alcoholic and a drug addict and getting a drunk driving ticket and choosing diversion instead of going to jail or losing my license. And I said, hey, don't focus on punishment in your law. Focus on rehabilitation. Focus on prevention, right? You could be the model for the entire world, just like you were with overturning AIDS, and blah blah blah. And of course they didn't, and they came out with a bill that was very harsh. It had capital punishment, and including the possibility of capital punishment for repeat offenders of simple homosexuality. And it's like, oh, why did you do this, right? So, and then I get blamed for it, right? They then accuse me of being the mastermind of the so-called Kill the Gays bill, which was not true. I always was against that. I wrote a letter to them and told them that I didn't like it and suggested alternatives. And they wrote back letters saying, thank you for your opinions, but we're going to do what we want. And none of that mattered. Of course, the left, they always lie. And if they get something that serves their narrative, then they'll use it. And the narrative on dealing with homosexuality issues is that everybody who opposes gay rights is like the Nazis, and they want to eventually exterminate everybody. That's their narrative. And so here, they have the perfect opportunity. A bill that emerges in an African country immediately after Scott Lively was there, and no one can really disprove the narrative because it's all the way over there in Africa. And man, did I get bashed and beat up. The New York Times, the London Guardian, the Canadian National Post, ABC, Nightline, just on and on and on and on and on. And I'm just reeling because it's like, I wasn't top tier, pro-family activist. I'm just sort of a one-man missionary with my wife to the global pro-family movement, with some special skills and be able to articulate, but then all of a sudden I'm propelled into the top spot, as in fact, and Paul Singer, that guy that funds the leftist agenda inside the GOP, paid for a dossier that the Human Rights Campaign put out, identifying me as public enemy #1 of the global LGBT agenda. Because in the interim, they had filed a lawsuit in U.S. federal court in Springfield, Massachusetts, 3 blocks down the street from my church, accusing me of crimes against humanity for preaching against homosexuality in Uganda. Completely outrageous misrepresentation of international law, misrepresentation of the facts. Just for a second, just get a sense of how dishonest, how malicious they are in their propaganda. That the core of the lawsuit, the one thing that even comes remotely close to the idea of a crime against humanity, is the murder of sexual minorities Uganda smug leader David Kato, murdered in broad daylight in Kampala, Uganda. The news then jumps on the stories in 2011, jumps on the story, and all of a sudden I'm being blamed. Cato's blood is on my hands because 2 years earlier I had actually spoken against homosexuality at a conference. Just unbelievable, connecting the dots that, because this guy dies 2 years later, you said this here 2 years before, you are responsible? Ridiculous. But nevertheless, I had to fend that off, from the most powerful media organizations in the world. And then 5 days later, I'm praying for vindication. Lord, it was tough to take this. And especially being a pastor, loving people, right? It's the worst thing that they can accuse you of as a Christian, that you hate people, because we're supposed to love everybody, right? Not to approve of what they do, but to love them. And I do, and I did. But the bottom line was, 5 days later, the young man who killed David Kato was caught and confessed to the police, and they even confessed to the media. They had a press conference about it because it was such a big deal in Uganda. Who was it? A gay prostitute that had been bailed out of jail by Kato to be his live-in lover and houseboy on the promise that he was going to give him money and things. And when he didn't do it, the kid picked up, 22-year-old kid, picked up a hammer and bashed his brains out. Right? He got convicted on evidence, was sentenced to 30 years in Ugandan prison, and that's where he is. And you know what? Everybody knew that on the left when they filed the lawsuit, but they left that out. They actually pitched this idea to a U.S. federal judge who, just because he was ideologically aligned with them, they knew they could get away with it, that I was responsible, suggested, heavily implied, that I was responsible for the murder of David Kato, and left it hanging, the implication hanging, that he was murdered by some sort of enraged homophobe or something, enraged because of Scott Lively's inflammatory rhetoric. And they just left the facts out. And even when we came forward with those facts to the judge, he said, what of it, right? It was like it didn't matter. So that's when we knew we were in for trouble. Well, our motion to dismiss came up in the oral argument, and the judge in open court said, the U.S. Supreme Court is reviewing the Alien Tort Statute under which this case was brought. And if they rule against the Alien Tort Statute, then this case will be moot. So I'm going to wait to give my ruling on this motion to dismiss. So it comes down, the U.S. Supreme Court does, in fact, in Kiobel versus Dutch Petroleum, does gut 95% of the Alien Tort Statute. Leaves, and it just says it can only be applied for exactly what it was intended for when it was passed in the 1790s as an anti-piracy on the high seas law. And so every case in the United States that was under the Alien Tort Statute was dismissed, except mine. And the judge who had said he was going to dismiss the case then instead didn't, and then just accepted these bogus arguments from the smug attorneys. The smug attorneys are the Center for Constitutional Rights, you know, if ever was organization was misnamed, right, out of Manhattan. In fact, their address in Manhattan is 666 Broadway, 7th floor, right? You know, now you can't make this stuff up. Not only did Judge Ponser not grant the motion to dismiss, he denied it and opened us up to another 4 years of really aggressive, sort of Damocles sort of litigation, and we had to produce. I had to produce every document that I'd ever written on the subject. They crawled through every single aspect of our organization. Tens of thousands of documents of discovery, because I write a lot, right? I've got stuff all over the place, and I had to pull it together from every place, and then they deposed me in Manhattan. They brought in an expert in civil litigation from Boston, and it was really very, very challenging. If it hadn't been for Liberty Counsel, you know, Matt Staver and my attorney, Harry Mehet, a Romanian Christian man, wonderful guy and a fantastic attorney, and the whole team there, they would have put me out of business. I would have been bankrupted. And they would have stopped me just by taking away my ability to do anything except speak to whoever would listen without an organization. But in the end, Judge Ponser, we maneuvered legally to a place where Judge Ponser had no choice but to grant or to rule on the motion for summary judgment. There's two stages in civil litigation. I'm an attorney as well. There's two stages in civil litigation where you can ask the court to dismiss. The first one is the motion to dismiss at the very beginning, before discovery, and then the motion for summary judgment after discovery, when everything's been gathered, and you basically go to the judge and say they got nothing, right? And they got nothing, really, literally. They didn't prove a single of their points. It was so profoundly a dry hole for them. They could only proceed just out of sheer malice, and which they did. But the judge was basically forced in the end to grant the motion for summary judgment, to say I have no jurisdiction, which was exactly what he was supposed to do at the motion to dismiss. The 4 years that I had to go through as a result of his denial of our motion was completely unnecessary. It was all to punish me because of my beliefs. It was really authentic religious discrimination at the highest level, and the judge was engaged in judicial malfeasance, right? A really egregious breach of judicial ethics in having done what he did, and then in the end, what he did in his motion granting, or in his ruling granting our motion for summary judgment, he says, I have no jurisdiction. But then he continues on to say, but Lively's guilty of crimes against humanity. No legal reasoning at all. And then it goes off into this sort of diatribe that's like written like the level of a high school gay newspaper. Really unbelievably unprofessional. Calling me a crackpot bigot, and it was, and it's almost like, I think he almost let somebody else write that part, because part of the ruling is sort of dignified federal judge level writing, and then the rest of it, the other stuff, with all the finger pointing and accusations, is really amateurish. So here we are stuck. But on top of that, a federal judge is supposed to retain jurisdiction on all the causes of action within the complaint. Now this is sort of above most people's heads that aren't lawyers, but the opposition, in order to get the thing past the motion to dismiss at the beginning, they had added 2 state law causes of action, conspiracy and negligence, which are, any good civil litigator knows that that's the easiest thing to get through the motion to dismiss process. Other stuff can be knocked out, but those, because they're so vague, judges will sometimes, if a judge wants to rule with the plaintiff or with a party, with a plaintiff, they will put those in there to give them something to hang their hat on, and that's what they did. But the judge is supposed to retain jurisdiction over those, and when he dismisses a case, he has to dismiss those too. But Judge Ponser didn't do that in my case. Not only did he engage in this hyperbole and vitriol against me, but he also told the attorneys that he was dismissing the state law claims without prejudice, meaning they could be refiled in state court and they start the whole process over again. And so we had to appeal our win. So it's very unusual. We won the case, and then we immediately went back to court and say, we're appealing this. And appeals court, please strike out this language and force the judge to dismiss the state law claims. And that's pending right now. So it's still not over. I'm still under this.